Yeah. Good morning. Hey, folks. I'm just waiting for Rose to. Let's see. Rose, will you send it again? Mm-mm-mm.
Hi.
Hello, hello. Happy morning after the eclipse.
Happy morning. I wonder how everyone is feeling. A little
hmm
wiped, a little wired. Wow.
So much happened just since last night.
Yeah, it's a wild one, huh?
Yeah. How have you been noticing the eclipse?
Just done. I've just been overwhelmed, overworked, feel like a full cup walking around. Like, please, nobody change anything. Please don't get in my way or I will have a full collapse. But
Meltdown.
yeah, it's on my sun by like exact degree though. So
Right. It's yeah, it's
square.
square. It's square your sun, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's squaring my sun. So
Yeah. Yeah.
fun. How about you? How you feeling?
I'm actually feeling good. I went out to see some live music last night, which I haven't done in almost 2 years, and um, that was fun. I didn't get to see the eclipse because it is rainy and overcast here here in the Pacific Northwest on Chinook territory in Portland, Oregon. Um, And yeah, I was telling Rose earlier that a couple of days ago I had this project that I've been working on for several weeks and super stressed out about, and then it just all fell apart, like in this very surprising way. And it was like, no, this isn't going to happen. And I just really relaxed, and I was like, thank God, it's not going to happen. Even though up till that point I was like, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, and then it didn't happen, and now I'm feeling my body decompress and like feeling this lesson of Taurus, I think, which is slow down. You know,
Mhm.
I was moving in this way with this project that was like fast and rushed and feeling like I didn't have the resources I need to finish it up, and then it fell apart, and I was like, oh, I'm a human again. I'm not trying to be a machine.
I mean, that kind of sounds like transitioning from Gemini, Sagittarius, and that like buzzy, maybe a little too exuberant, enthusiastic Jupiterian influence, right? Of like, I can do it all. I can do
Mm-hmm.
everything. If I'm interested in it, I should do it. To like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, Taurus, Scorpio. On the other side of every death is rest.
True, true facts. Facts. You gotta lay it down.
I mean, right? Like Taurus wants to grow and grow and grow, but it also wants to rest. And
Yeah,
Scorpio, or that last decan that we were talking about, right?
yeah.
Because each sign's influence gets divided by triplicity, right?
hmm
Um, kind of what energy it moves towards more. And of course, at the end of Taurus, we have Taurus for the first decan, right? Virgo for the second decan, and then Capricorn energy for the third, right? Which is Saturn ruled. So there is
Yeah,
this, which is
yeah.
the area that this eclipse took place in, right? So
Right.
the idea
Yes.
the death brings rest for you.
hmm Yeah, totally. Someone asked what degree the eclipse was at. It was at 27 degrees of Taurus, and um, every sign has 30 degrees. So in that last chunk of 10 degrees, which is called a decan, a chunk of 10 degrees, that Saturn ruled decan of Taurus is kind of like Taurus as an energy is like, if I just show up to work every day and work a little bit and then also rest and, you know, keep cultivating bounty in my life. Like it's all going to work out, like this slow, steady cultivating of abundance. And like, yes, like this is life. And then that last decan of Taurus is like, all life has a final point, and all life forms have to break down and change. And the Saturn ruled influence like kind of points us to, I think, what do you think about this? I think it's like Saturn as an archetype is just presenting the truth. Like there's limits to everything, you know, like as beautiful as it might be, whatever it is that you build, at some point it's going to have to change. But then our experience here with Saturn is like, fuck you, like limits, like, no, I'm gonna lose it, you know, like this kind of resistance and feeling of struggle. And
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing too, what we know about unlimited growth in the body is that's cancer,
Cancer.
actually. When things
Mm-hmm.
keep growing and don't recognize that like there is a natural boundary, or things grow into areas that they're not supposed to, right?
Yeah.
You know, or trimming the split ends on your hair too, right? Like you can't have any new growth until you get cut out the old.
Right.
But it's not fun when you're on that side of things, like all the rulers of the world who are denying Saturn right now. Like, you're
Right.
in your 70s, retire. I can't retire.
What you gonna do with all that money? Where are you gonna take it?
Who knows? Who knows, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what quality of life are you going to have at a certain point, you know?
Right.
So, which I think is
Right.
another Taurian concern, right? You want a
Yes.
quality of life, not
Right.
just endless.
Right. Right. And I mean, I have my moon in the second decan of Taurus, and I think one of the things that I learned from that decan and from that work is that it's the decan of shared abundance, you know, and so as much as you can take in, you also have to give out. And that's part of how you cultivate a quality of life, is like you share what you have, you know, you cultivate like an abundance that spreads. And whatever the like scarcity mindset that Taurus can get into, I think, especially in that last decan where it's the fear of Saturn can set in, and there can be this kind of rigidifying and closing and like, what if I don't have what I need kind
Yep.
of instinct. Yeah, it's part of what will break something down eventually, or turn it
Yeah.
to stone.
Speaking of stone, it sounds like you're sidling over to perhaps talk about Algol and the Medusa myth. Yes? No?
Yes, yes, that was my really great transition.
We're great.
um, the eclipse last night was conjunct the fixed star Algol, which is also sometimes called the demon's head, and it relates to the Gorgon or the Medusa myth of Medusa's face when she had been transformed into this like hideous beast that would turn men to stone. And as we all know, the goddess myths, especially the demon goddess myths, have roots in patriarchal colonization.
Yeah.
And when these figures become demonic, they're often being cast into a particular light in order to assist the forces that seek to consume them, homogenize them, and undo their power or deflate their power. So I wasn't super familiar with the Medusa myth before the last couple of days, and I've been researching it a lot. And a couple of interesting things that I found out. So first of all, Medusa, a lot of folks know her from like the Greek myth where Perseus beheads her and gives her head to Athena, and it's like this whole kind of story of triumph over this monster. But Medusa's origins are in northern Africa. She was 1/3 of the triple goddess figure, the mother, maiden, crone archetype. In Egypt, she was called Neith. In Libya, Anatha. And the triple goddess, so a three-part goddess, arose from the primeval floodwaters. And inscriptions about her describe this message, which you may find resonates in a somewhat familiar way. The Bible. I have come from myself. I'm all that has been and will be. No mortal has been yet able to lift the veil that uncovers me, which is synonymous, right, with her power as also the death mother and the death goddess. That when we look at Medusa, when we see her face, we're turned to stone. And so when a body dies, it stiffens, right? Like rigor mortis sets in and the body is turned to stone. And so part of this myth is pointing at the more indigenous cosmologies and understandings of the whole as divine. Life and death go together. They are not separate. Dark and light, rise and set together. They're not separate. And when the one God traditions came in and the sky God traditions came in, they're seeking to promote the story of eternal life. Like, God in heaven, if you follow my rules, then you get to live forever and you never have to die. What you said a moment ago, right? Like when things don't die, they become cancerous. Yeah. So then we have this cancerous plague of colonization spread throughout the world, erecting monuments of impermanent permanence, right? Like, I want to live forever. I'm going to build this power for myself that will never die. Yeah. And yeah, another thing that I was looking at was, so this association that Medusa has with snakes, her hair is full of snakes. In the triple goddess tradition, Medusa walks with a pouch full of live snakes. And right? What a babe. So these snakes are representative of wisdom and renewal. And of course, like, the snake is a very traditional, in many traditions, I would say, like, a symbol of transformation and renewal. We get now the Taurus Scorpio axis. And she also carried the Gorgon mask. And so this mask was like painted red with this big tongue coming out. And this was to frighten the uninitiated and to keep them from stealing the secrets of the dark moon. So a couple of interesting things there. And then later, in the Greek myths, the triple goddess ends up being separated. And so the mother, Metis, the maiden, Athena, and then the crone, Medusa, are all separated. Medusa is considered to be the most powerful. She's the goddess of wisdom and death and rebirth, as well as sexuality and like sexual initiation rites. But Athena then gets reborn and recast in the Greek myth as being born out of her father's head, fully armed. And so she becomes this feminine archetype of chastity and virginity and war. And there's a whole story about how she casts this finalizing vote to basically separate mothers from their lineage and to say that, like, fathers are the one that define a lineage. And so with her vote, women like take a huge fall in terms of power. But I read another interpretation, like a feminist retelling of that particular part of the story that I really liked, which was that after Perseus beheads Medusa and he gives Medusa's head to Athena and she puts it on her shield, that she's actually honoring Medusa in that action, and that her shield becomes this representation of the power to turn men to stone, so to speak. And how this story retold it was really looking at the rape of Medusa, because that plays into why she's beheaded. She's raped by Poseidon, the god of the seas. And then supposedly Athena gets pissed. I don't know why, that her sister, or part of her is raped, but I don't know why she would get pissed at Medusa.
And Medusa,
I don't think she was. I think she was pissed. And then she, and because at that point Medusa was like a beautiful goddess or something, she's raped.
Yeah.
Then Athena, in her vengeance, turns her into Medusa, the monster.
Yeah.
And so in this retelling, what I got was that in her mercy, Athena turned Medusa into this creature who could turn men to stone
Who could
and
protect
enact,
herself. Yeah.
who could protect herself. Yeah, it was victim blaming, and who could enact vengeance.
Yeah.
Because when I tune into Medusa's energy, it's like fucking fury, you know? Like, and this image of like a rapist, you know, and in the last decan of Taurus, there's reference to this as well. The last decan of Taurus is associated with another demigoddess, Ate, the goddess of hubris, who it's like leads men in, or leads people, but they always talk about men.
There's a lot of
you
them.
know, yeah, into like hasty, ill thought out, self-centered, you know, actions that create havoc and destruction. And Ate is followed by what are they called? The Nephi, like these old women that are kind of like personifications of prayers for repentance, you know, like I'm sorry, right? But like that decan of Taurus, I think, is like, for me, it was feeling like the hubris of human beings to just take and take and take and take and be like, I'm so powerful, I'm never gonna die, like this is mine, 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 mine. And then it's like, you know what, bitch, you're going down. Like you will reap your own destruction.
Yeah. Which like we get time and again through, I mean, if we're looking at like the Greek lineage, right? It's that a god is terrified of losing its power as their offspring come into maturity. So they do everything they can, right? And also most Greek myths have that, like, I'm trying to avoid my fate or my destiny. And by doing so, I actually just accelerate that process, right? But if you look at Uranus and Saturn and Jupiter, right? All those generations fearful that their children will overthrow them and eat them or trap them in the middle of the earth, right? Which also then goes back to the switch from matriarchal to patriarchal, quote unquote, civilizations and colonization, right? That like that solar figure trying to live longer and longer was representative of like how long the sacrificial king would get to live. And then when he started throwing kids in instead of himself, right, to avoid it and to try to fend off the inevitable, right?
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think about well, maybe let's back up, and like we're in this transition between eclipses and Gemini and Sag, and then eclipses in Taurus and Scorpio. Like what's your take on that transition, and how are you feeling it?
I mean, I think it's going from, you know, Gemini and Sag is so much about information and sharing information and what is truth and who's got the broadest view, who's the least biased, right? So we have this rise of fake news, lots of propaganda, a lot of figures rise, like gurus in the health and wellness world, right? Rising to the top and then being exposed. So I think there was this idea that like people could speak or pontificate without consequence for the last kind of 2 years. And now that we're switching into Taurus Scorpio, you know, I think that Taurus and Scorpio is bringing it a little more into the physical plane and kind of connecting the dots of like, okay, well, you can't just talk shit for 2 years and convince a whole group of people to work against their own best interest and not have consequence. Facebook, you can't.
Oh, Rose is taking a moment.
And not have consequences, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that Taurus and Scorpio are more like, okay, what are the consequences of all these thoughts and ideas and information in the physical plane, right? Are they promoting life? Are they promoting death? Are they aligned with our values? Are they resisting an inevitability? Like what's happening here? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah, one thing that I was thinking about with that with this transition is the transition of like philosophy and kind of what you're talking about, like the South Node in Sag. It's like ill thought out philosophies or ideals and truths or whatever that someone's going to espouse that like they're regressive. They're pulling us into the past. That South Node influence of like, it, you know, this is pulling me back. This is pulling me back. And so many people kind of like in the middle of the pandemic, you know, like, when are we going to go back? When are we going to go back? And this refrain of like conservative or populist like mentality all over the world, you know, that's like we don't want to move forward. We want to go back. We want to go back. We want to go back.
Yeah.
And then what happens in the just inevitable movement of time, which is that you can never go back. Like you absolutely, there's no way. Time is moving in one direction. And even though I believe that time is a spiral and like all times are happening at the same time, the truth of our bodies in the material plane is that we continue to move forward, and the residue or the haunting of the past continues to build the present. And that feels like, as we get into Taurus, Scorpio, the building, right? The like coming into form that Taurus represents, and the haunting and the haunting of Scorpio, yeah, as well as the power of transformation, because I do feel like as much as there's so much like regressive, like futility and panic that's happening, like I do also feel like a lot of people are doing such a deep transformation work and really trying to look at shadows and going like, how did we get here? Like, how did we get to a place on the planet where we're literally talking about a time span of under 10 years that maybe, you know, maybe there's like some kind of hope that we're going to be able to salvage like air, like breathable air, and, you know, like water or forests, like the real values, right? Like the real things that we need to sustain ourselves, as opposed to, I got to go back to this time when I could just move in the direction of like capitalist success. And maybe I'd have an idea that I work really hard, I'll be on top or like close to the top.
Well, the idea of a future without consequence, though, that's the thing. Like, I just want to not know what I know now. That's the reality, right? I just don't. And Scorpio and Pluto both ask us to face the things that we think we're going to die if we do. And the truth is, like, we will in some way. Some part of us will.
Yeah.
And yet, what you can't go back.
Right. And I think that's part of, you know, this triple goddess myth. It's like death is a healthy part of life.
Yes.
And I'm curious to hear like how you feel this transition for yourself and like outside of the theoretical, maybe with your clients or something. Yeah. But I know like this kind of, for me, like the eclipse experience that I had last week of like the way that I was striving to bring something into form actually felt like really unconscious, like death fear to me, because how I was working is I was like working in this way that I pre-pandemic would work all the time, you know, where it was always like, oh my God, I got to like do a million jobs so I can survive, so I can pay my bills, so I can like, and like I was always like doing the self-employment hustle. And in these last couple of years, one thing that's become like more and more clear to me is like that's unsustainable. Like I can't work like that. I absolutely can't work like that. And this kind of like feeling of like, oh no, I won't have the thing that I need. Like I won't have this job. Like, fuck, what am I going to do? In that space, it's like, you know what? There's already life around me. Like if I slow down and get relational, there's like there's support that I'm not looking at, because the place that I was before was in this very self-focused, like, I have to do da 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 in order to survive. And in that place, I'm not at all relational. Like, I'm talking to my partner and my friends, and I'm like, I can't see you for 2 weeks because, like, I have to finish this thing, and I can't sleep, and I can't, like, feed myself. I'm just gonna suffer so that I can survive.
Yeah, very relatable. And I think that, yeah, for me personally, I have been slowing down out of just like necessity, overwhelm, and exhaustion. And then it actually has allowed me to be like, right now, I'm trying, there was a period of time where I was always trying to stack up like the next 6 things, right? Because of that paranoia, that anxiety, that like no secret trust fund, you know what I mean? Like, need to stay on top of stuff. But the more I've been able to just like be present where I am and be really focused on what I'm working on now and trust that the next thing will come organically from that. And if I can like really deliver on what I'm focused on now and be like, also try to be self-generative rather than relying on existing power structures, that like, that's that Taurus lesson there of that slow growth. But also something Taurus and Scorpio are not good at is letting go, right?
Yeah.
Releasing these wild expectations of how much I can do in a day or a month or a year, and just trying to do this thing and do it well, and then move on to the next thing,
Yeah.
Which means like there's so many potentials dying there that you need to let die.
Right. What would you like, what's your take on, like, what are you telling people, like, in the next 2 years to October 23, we have these eclipses? What advice do you have for folks, like, thinking about these eclipses in their own lives or in their charts?
I mean, it largely depends on what houses, right, things are falling in, and what, so it's like there's not a blanket, but in general, slowing down and like not trying to hold on to things that don't want to be held. Being close, being available, but also putting some of that, like, be your own house plant. Pay attention to how you're doing every day, right? Like, do you need more water? Like, do you need a little turn so you get more sun? Do you need me to just stop fucking with you for a day and a half so you can do your thing? But in general, I think slowness and letting things die.
Yeah. Yeah. I like what you said about be your own house plant. Like, again, like, going back to the middle decan of Taurus, Austin Coppock has this whole series on the decans, and he was talking about that decan as the place of like steady cultivation and balance. And he gave this example of, like, you can't inhale forever, like, you have to exhale. And if you have a plant, if you have like a house plant, that plant will thrive when you give it when you consistently give it the amount of water that it needs, but not if you wait for like 2 weeks and then drown it. Like that doesn't work. You have to like show up consistently for something, but then also know when to pull back. And that, like, letting something die, like, I think about, for me, I have Scorpio in my 4th house, and Leo rising, for any other Leo risings out there. And moving into this eclipse, like, a lot of the stuff that was coming up for me and kind of preceded the falling apart of that job was really intense scarcity programming. And like, I come from a family of immigrants, and people who like had a lot of trauma in the depression, Great Depression, and like they're like, folks that are just like, if I make $1, I'm going to save 80 cents of it. It's just like, save every single thing that you can. And in order to save that means that we have to be absolutely frugal, never spend any money. And it's like the holding on really tightly that
Yeah.
and it's so gripped in fear. And all this stuff was coming up for me leading up to that. And it was like, wow, like all these roots, you know, thinking about Scorpio and these and root
Mm-hmm.
systems, like all these roots that get us like entangled and entwined with survival and power and preservation and what we'll do in order to get the pleasure. Like we'll put ourselves through so much pain in order to get the pleasure that we think is there. It's like one
Yeah.
manifestation maybe.
I mean, that just draws me into the Venus and Capricorn, Venus retrograde, Pluto return story and how that ties into these eclipses, right? Because the same day, right, of this eclipse, Venus entered its retrograde shadow, right?
Yep.
So for those who aren't familiar with its cycle, what Venus retrogrades every 2.5 years-ish, 2 years and a few months. The last one I think was in Scorpio season of 2018. Does that sound right?
I don't remember. I can
Anyway,
look.
the point is Venus usually only takes what under a month to go through a sign, but
Yeah.
it's in Capricorn from it entered on November 5th. It's there
Yep.
till March 6th. Its
Yep.
shadow stretches until what, March 3rd, we were
March
saying?
3rd. Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
if Venus is what we value and how we connect to people and how we want to build relationships and kind of what we want to build them around and our relationship to resource, in Capricorn, we can get a lot of that scarcity stuff, right? And that denied or delayed pleasure. It
Yeah.
can also be good. It's not
Mm-hmm.
all bad, but these are the things that we're thinking about right now, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think of Venus and Capricorn as, you know, a place where traditionally Venus maybe like has a little bit of a harder time. Like Capricorn can be very austere and not particularly um like if Venus is the planet of love, it's not that Capricorns aren't super loving at all, I'm not saying that.
No.
But you know that there's like this emotional withholding that can definitely like be part of a Capricorn representation.
Yeah.
And I think of Venus in Capricorn, for me, feels like simplification and less is more. Where, you know, Venus in a lot of ways wants abundance, but in
More is
Capricorn,
more,
it's
yeah.
like, yeah, in Capricorn, it's kind of like, what is really going to sustain me in the long term?
Yeah.
And especially when it comes to like relationship energy, you know, like are these relationships structured in a way that they are moving in a direction that will like sustain us in this relationship, or that the relationship itself will create generative energy, you know, or do things need to get, you know, restructured and reconfigured so that people are happier in them, or
Yeah.
like more yeah, more sustainable in their own energy. And then when it comes to, I mean, we were talking about this too, like values and money and economics, and Rose was earlier before we got on the live talking about the Sibley chart, which is the United States Declaration of Independence signing chart, like the US birthday chart. And so Venus will be stationing retrograde conjunct with the US is having its Pluto return, Pluto and Capricorn. So there's this big question around like values, like
Yeah.
what are the actual values of this place, like this body?
Yeah. And you know, you can't breathe money. You can't drink oil,
Facts.
you know?
Yeah.
And Venus and Capricorn can be, you know, it doesn't have to be reverent to some kind of far right idea of like conservative values, right? Like Venus and Capricorn can actually be looking back as far as it can see and looking at the ways that some people take care of their fucking home.
Right.
You know,
Right.
that some folks really are reverent towards
Right.
life and are interested in living in a symbiotic way with
Yeah.
their environment rather than constant dominance and subjugation, right?
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I guess like because the eclipse today's eclipse or last night's eclipse is trine with Pluto, and it's trine of Venus's retrograde station point. For me, there's like something coming up around, okay, like Pluto as a symbol of death and rebirth, of forces that kill, but also forces that regenerate and reemerge, and this kind of idea of like the second fruiting of something that is like hardier and more resilient.
Yes.
And I feel like, I mean, being a millennial, like I have a lot of clients and friends that have generational placements in Capricorn.
Yeah.
And it feels like this generation, like this time, a lot of what's happening is a very Plutonian process of like excavation and digging down into the roots and pulling something up and going like 200 and however many years ago when the United States was formed, there was this concretization of power, solidification, and grabbing of power that in and of itself, was a theft. Like it was entirely a theft. The Declaration of Independence language is like stolen language.
Right.
And
from the Haudenosaunee, right? Like, what the fuck?
Yeah, but also it's like going back to this third decan of Taurus, like, and this rape myth, right? Like, I'm just going to take what I want. Like, I don't want the whole thing. I don't want all of you. Like, I want this part of you. Like, this part of this thing, like, gives me power, gives me satisfaction. I'm just going to take that and like, let the rest rot. And so it's like, this is the birth of the United States as an entity is like, I'm going to take this land, I'm going to take this language, I'm going to take, and build this like edifice of permanence and like the greatest nation in the world, like this kind of shit. And then here we are in 2021, and it's like, no, this is collapsing. It's corrosive, it's destructive, and it's rotting from the inside out. And then meanwhile, simultaneously, there's a birthing and reemergence and remembering of, in all of these different ways, again, like Medusa's like crown of snakes, like all of these different, mycelial kind of like cracks forming and roots springing up, where it feels like people are like, look at what was stolen, look at what was lost, remember those traditions, like remember that if we trace any of our lineages back far enough, we come from people who knew how to live in balance with the land.
Yeah.
And many of us come from lineages that have been severed, that have been beheaded. Like there's been this split of the body and the mind, and that we carry this split in ourselves as long as we believe in the split.
Yeah.
And so there's like I feel I'm like embodiment practice and like consciousness to me is one of the most political spaces we can be in. Yeah. Because it's how, we have to feel like we have to feel it. If we don't feel it, then we can like run around like fucking crazy people thinking that we're not going to die. We have to be touched. We have to feel it. And then in the feeling of something, it's like, oh, this balance can start to come back. We can recognize the impact of our actions and decisions to a greater extent, but we can't do that unless we remember, like unless we look back, unless we feel the magnitude of what has happened. Yeah,
which I think that's one of the great teachings of Scorpio, right? Like Scorpio never fucking forgets. Scorpio is an accounting of everything. Scorpio has all the receipts. They're alphabetical. They probably won't pull them out on you until you do some fuck shit. And then Scorpio's like, oh, all right now, right?
Right.
But I think that also is like, again, part of that transition from the Gemini-Sag axis, because we still have that one more eclipse, right? Is ideas don't die, but bodies do and must, right? And that's part of this transition.
Yeah,
and ideas have consequence.
Yeah. Oh, that reminds me of this other piece that I found in Medusa's Myth. And so now I'm trying to find it. So when Perseus is tasked to kill Medusa, he's assisted by Hermes. And
that's right.
Hermes gives him the weapon, which is a magical curved sword, and that is the only weapon able to slay Medusa. And so I was reading this article, and they were like, I wonder if the curve of the sword is a reference to the moon's sickle shape, because Medusa was part of this trifecta of the moon goddess.
Yeah.
But what I was thinking is like a curved magical sword is language, you know, like language as a force of colonization and oppression. Like, at least with the English language, I mean, Robin Wall Kimmerer writes on this so beautifully, like how the English language has been built around the possessive pronoun and like I, you know, whereas a lot of indigenous languages don't even have that separation. It's like I don't exist in separation. And the words, the language for manifestation is a language of life rather than objectification. Whereas in the English language, we're like, that's a thing. You know, in other languages, there may be more of like, this is a form expressing this thingness, right? Like this is a being expressing treeness, or a chicken expressing chickenness. You know, it's not like you know, the English language has such ownership built into it, and objectification.
Well, the other thing about a curved sword, like that's what we use to harvest, right? Because when you cut with it, the thing falls towards you. So the idea of like assimilating these lineages and these rituals into what the colonizing body to help bring people along, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm getting that, like the scythe of Saturn there too,
right?
As well, with Saturn's symbol.
Which Saturn also, they say Saturn had a scythe that looked like a crow's beak, and so that's also, and that Cronus actually comes from crows, right? So
right.
You can worship that, or you can avoid it.
Right. And Saturn is considered by some to be a feminine archetype related to the crown.
Yeah. And then, you know, the men
then those motherfuckers.
Yeah. Then they just curved sorted it.
Someone asked if this would be if the recording would be posted, and yeah, I'll post the recording. I can never get captions to work for some reason, so I'll post it also on YouTube, where the auto captions are pretty good.
Cool.
Just FYI. Rose, what do you think about this upcoming eclipse? So we're in this like transition right now. Last night's eclipse was the first in the seasons of Scorpio and Taurus that will take us through 2023. But then in 2 weeks, we have the very last eclipse in this sequence in Gemini and Sagittarius that started in June of 2020.
Right. Well, so that's like, those are the eclipse cycles of fake news, are they not? Right? That was part of building this whole, I mean, in a very United States centric, right? That also, those eclipses hit off with kind of the height of the pandemic in a lot of places, right? It also, the uprising. So I guess we're going to get some, you know, the pandemic's not getting put to bed. White supremacy is not getting put to bed, right? So we know that like these things aren't done. Nothing's like done. But I would imagine we'll get some punctuation marks on things, right? Some kind of disaster is probably going to happen with the murderers of Armored Arbory. What are their names? Those guys, Kevin something. Anyway,
I haven't registered their names.
That trial is going on. I would imagine there's going to be some stuff going there. As far as the United States goes, this is where I live, so this is my main frame of reference. And the eclipse is like pretty heavy across the ascendant descendant axis. I think that further tensions, it doesn't look like our government can get anything done or take care of anybody. So I'm sure that some kind of disaster, probably the government will get defunded again or something.
Yeah. I mean, Biden did just pass yesterday that really watered down Build Back Better bill. Yeah.
You're like, hey, can we go to Japanese Village and get some tonkatsu ramen? And they're like, actually, we got you a top ramen packet. And you have to boil your You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just like, But yeah, I think mostly it's kind of closing out, like the time for thinking, planning, pontificating, it has come to an end. It's time to be like on the ground, on the earth, trying to
Yeah.
do something,
Yeah.
or just dying,
Yeah.
not to be rude. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, open up the Gulf for drilling. Yeah, what the hell? Push him
Right.
left.
Well, I was that when that person commented about that, I was thinking like in June of 2020, we were leading up to that election
Yeah.
cycle.
Yeah.
And one of Biden's platforms was about like, he was going to do all this stuff for the environment. And that, yeah, just after the COP 22 or 26, whatever that meeting
26.
was,
Yeah, whatever.
26, um, that, one of his first actions was to put that up for auction.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, I think, yeah, this feeling of like the battle, for survival
Yeah.
is like it's like it keeps getting more and more real. Like it's been real for a long time, and
Yeah.
it keeps getting, it's like the grasp is tightening. People are getting more and more squeezed, and where for already like centuries lots of people in the world have been feeling
Oh,
this. It's like closing in on first world nations too, and there's this kind of like it's like now or never, y'all. Like now or never.
yeah. And kind of seeing like, oh, actually, all of this lip service, all of these false promises, like we're seeing that they're coming to nothing, right? And now it's like everyone's feeling the physical impact, right? The body politic, the body is feeling it now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And again, I think I've been doing this for myself a lot of just like there's the shitstorm of like political actors and like what's happening on that stage, and then there's such incredible ground movement, like
Yeah.
underground movement,
Yeah.
and I feel like language is shifting a lot, and processes of accountability are becoming more um, like we're being educated on like what does redress look like, or what does reparation look like,
Mm-hmm.
and how can we as individuals like start to enact change even if it's not going to happen at these levels of government.
Yeah. I also just got a notification that Kyle Rittenhouse was acquitted of all charges, which means right-wing people have just been given the green light to shoot any protester and get away with it. So that's cool. Eclipse news.
It's an I mean uh, what
Yeah. I wish I was surprised,
I'm
but
not
that doesn't mean
surprised.
I'm not scared.
I mean that judge, like one black juror,
Yeah.
I mean that judge like
Yeah.
there was no judgment there.
Yeah. Yeah. Which again, Pluto and Capricorn, these institutions, all this power that we are giving them,
Mm-hmm.
there's no more delusion, We can see everybody pulling the levers.
Rose, how do you like, okay, so thinking back to this eclipse, so transitioning from last night's eclipse into December 3rd's total solar eclipse, there's going to be, so what happens? So we move, the eclipse was yesterday, then we
Yeah.
move into Sagittarius season day after tomorrow.
Yeah.
And then the sun and Mercury both conjoin on the south node, basically. So there's the superior conjunction of the sun and Mercury on the south node. Then Mercury makes a bunch of aspects. Then we have this total solar eclipse at 12 degrees Sag, and that's the last
Yeah.
of this series. I'm wondering, like, how do you feel like for yourself, and if you're talking with clients, like it's so easy to feel hopeless. And I think the South Node in Sag is like one possible symbol of that. It's like like Sagittarius is like hope, right? And South
Yeah.
Node is like no. And if if we're going to lose hope in a particular way, the North Node in Gemini could be this wild spinning of like, what now, what now, what now, what now, especially in
Yeah.
that second decan, you know, is like,
Yeah.
should I do this? Should I do that? Should I have a grasping? But then in another way, I'm thinking about like Bayo Kamalafe did this episode on finding our way with Prentice Hemphill, and he was talking
Mm-hmm.
about the loss of hope and like this
Yeah.
idea that hope as a construct is faulty in and of itself because it's rooted in the idea that something will stay the same, and that like the thing that we're trying, you know, it's like, oh, I have hope for this thing that's going to like survive me, or
Yeah.
like I can pull it from the past and build it in the future. And he's talking about, rather than hope, what would happen if we got really present and deep with what's happening right now and
Yeah.
allowed some other kind of emergence. So I'm curious, like for yourself, like as you feel this eclipse,
Yeah.
how are you thinking about like idealism and philosophy or guiding principles, Sagittarius, and then how are you feeling power? Like like moving into Taurus and Scorpio, like we've been talking about all this stuff that to me feels like powerless, you know, like the fucking
Yes.
government, like the white supremacists, like what do we do? But like how do you feel power, and how do you want to orient like in a direction that gives you an evolutionary um potential or possibility?
I mean, I think it's leaning into it is leaning into Gemini, but not into the spinning out. It's leaning back into being more curious about what's just around you and building smaller, stronger network. You know what I mean? Like nylon rope, you can hang off the side of a building on a 3/8 rope, right? And the reason is that it's like 1 million tiny strands. Those threads all break together, right? We know that. But Sagittarius sometimes having the bigger picture is overwhelming,
Mm.
right? Because we can't actually do a lot to change the entire world in one fell swoop. But if we remember that everything is relational and every small action has consequence, then instead of focusing on this huge thing that we can't fix, kind of building something smaller. Because the reality is these larger systems can't sustain us. We're all just numbers getting lost in them. And the one thing that has been cool about the last 2 years has been like, yes, misinformation has been spreading, but so have mutual aid campaigns, you know? And like, that is not, that's a stopgap. That's not a sustainable system, right? We can't just keep GoFunding each other's medical expenses. But likewise, we can't be waiting around for a bunch of dinosaurs who are in the pocket of the pharmaceutical companies to like give us Medicaid for all, right? So like, what's the middle ground there? If we can
Mm.
abandon the systems but have hope in smaller communities and then linking those up, I think that is the message to take away. Like, yeah, lose faith that somebody's going to come and save you. Like, we actually have
Mm-hmm.
to save each other.
Yeah, yeah, we have to save ourselves.
Yeah. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's hopeful.
I mean, I really appreciate this. I think when I heard that that podcast with Bio, like I was really appreciative of it, and I feel really appreciative of his teaching in general, like this idea that it's like, can we make a crack in the facade of something rather than trying to dream up an alternative? Let's look at the thing that's here and let's
Yeah.
crack it open,
Yeah.
and let's get like deep into it, because in the monuments of destruction that have been built,
Yeah.
there's also like the keys to the healing are
Yeah.
there. It's like we have to like unwind them a little bit and go back.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that feels a little bit like, if I think about the South Node as like an origin, you know, like in some ways, like the South Node could be representative of like what's pulling you into the past in a regressive, like de-evolutionary way.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, oh no, this can also be a portal
Yeah.
that it's like the present is arising from.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I think I don't know if it's a feeling of hope as much as like this, like you were talking about how the big picture can be overwhelming, but I feel like the big picture on a cosmic level for me always feels really calming. Like if
Oh,
I'm like,
yeah.
yeah, if I'm like, I'm feeling overwhelmed about the big picture of the
Yeah.
world, of the like political world or something. But then if I zoom way out and I'm like, Renee, the earth is 4.5 billion years old.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
human beings have been here for how many millions of years? Like not even a very small fraction of like the earth's total lifespan.
Yeah.
And this moment within the evolution of the body of the earth is a particular kind of moment, and it is a moment of
Yeah.
destruction, and the
Yeah.
earth has moved through cycles of destruction and rebirth in its own body. There have been times on this planet when carbon gases have been just as thick.
Yeah.
Thinking about like this triple goddess like arising from the primeval waters, like there was a time when the planet was covered in ocean. And what if my like human instinct to grasp on life and to think that human life is the thing that needs to prevail is the thing that's actually, or not even just human life, but like the human quality of life that I have as like an American born white woman,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
the thing that I can get into where it's like the fear of whatever's going to happen. Like if it's like, well, here's a moment of breaking down that is also producing like this alchemical transformation, and in a lot of people, like I feel this in myself so much, where it's like
Mhm.
my values are really shifting because I'm
Oh,
being
yeah.
forced to examine them. Like I
Yeah.
didn't even know I had certain values around like capitalism, or patriarchy,
Yeah.
that were just so deep in the marrow of my bones, the cells of my being, because I've come up in it. Like it's made me. And then this moment is like making me turn around and look at them and be like, this is an idea that made you. Do you want to be this idea? Do you want to continue to enact this idea?
And I think that's actually the closing out and the shifting here, right? The idea that actually fearing and avoiding death at all costs is not natural. It's something that we were indoctrinated into, that we were
Yeah.
taught. When in fact, this Taurus Scorpio axis is much more in tune in some ways with the natural rhythms of the body, of life, of our planet, right?
Yeah.
And that continuum, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is kind of like your last chance to like get really clear on what you believe and who you turn to for answers.
Yeah.
And then you need to start embodying those values,
Why
which is
does
not
my,
easy.
sorry to interrupt you, my Instagram just said there's only a minute and 45 seconds remaining. I thought we could go for 4 hours, but we could just go forever, Rose. I thought we could just live
I mean,
forever.
yeah, it's nice that you all are here, but this Renee and I would just hang out and do this anyways.
um, do you wanna, for all the folks that like have questions or chart
Yeah.
placements, do you wanna like sign off and then hop back on and we can do like a Q&A and chart placement live?
Yeah, that sounds good. I might hit the bathroom real quick.
Okay.
Do a little 2 minute break.
A little bio break.
A little
Can't
bio
you
break.
just
Yeah.
can't you just restart a live? I think so. How do I
Yeah.
do it?
Yeah. I don't know.
Geriatric
I
millennials.
don't know anything about it. Yeah, we're geriatric millennials. Can any of you,
How does that work?
can any of you younger people help us?
Okay, so we're going to restart the live, and please join again if you want
Yeah.
to ask questions or look at chart placements. Rose is going to take a bio break, and I'll just hop right back on because
I had a lot of coffee. I live at high altitude. Okay, I'll be back in a sec.
All right. I'm going to stop this live and I'll start it again. So if you want to join, please join again.